Guruve Gaurachandraya Radhikaya Tadali Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tad Bhaktaya Namo Namaha Vanchakalpatrubhyascha Kripa Sindhubheva Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Dandavat Pranam devotees. So this is a response video to a sort of collection of questions around the Bhakti Intensive video on Sambandha Gyan, and trying to break it down to a more practical level and a sort of more pragmatic understanding in terms of how the idea of Sambandha Gyan is applied to Abhideya or our practice and how it informs the practice. But rather than repeating what has already been delineated on the Sambandha Gyan class tapes or recordings, I wanted to try to approach it from a different angle to substantiate those same things, but to just approach it from a different angle of vision. So, Sri Sanatana Goswami Pad in Chaitanya Charitamrita, he asked Mahaprabhu, Kayami, Kenyamai, Jarita Patrai, who am I and why am I suffering? So, this question, Kayami especially, who am I, is sort of the crux transitional mindset from simply identifying with our material temporal package and entering into the search for the eternality of our identity, relation to the absolute truth, etc. So this question, who am I, is a pivotal point and pivotal mindset in the transition from material to spiritual consciousness. So it's almost imperative that that question, who am I, becomes an echo in the consciousness of an aspirant. The reason is, first, to understand the constitutional makeup of the soul. So the word soul is English word for Sanskrit Atma, but in every culture you have a concept about something called the soul. So soul, Atma, Ru, Ori. So in various cultures you'll find various names, but they all identify an essential being, which is the reality of who we are. And every culture then goes on to elaborate, but especially in our Vedic cosmology, goes on to elaborate the very nature of that essential being. So, in our theology, in our Bhakti theology, Srila Jiva Goswami Pad in Paramatma Sandarbha, he's described the Atma, attributing 21 different qualities to the Atma. And in doing that, he establishes what is the sort of essential identity of everyone. Because everyone is actually Atma, they're not the material circumstances or temporal karmic iteration that they find themselves in. They are, in fact, the soul. So, Jiva Goswami has also mentioned, Dasabhuti Harieva Nanyasha Eva Kadachana, that there is no scope for actually being something other than the Das of God, or the Das of Krishna. So that position is not a position that can be changed under any circumstances. Only the idea of being something else can be impressed on the Atma, but the actuality of being something else is not possible. Krishna also has spoken in Bhagavad Gita, Mamam Vamso Jiva Loke Jiva Bhuta Shanatana. The fact that the Jiva is the constitutional part and parcel of Bhagavan is a sanatana, an eternal reality. That cannot be changed. That cannot You cannot become something else. So when Jiva Goswami was describing these 21 qualities of the Atma, one of the qualities is Navikari. Navikari means that the Atma's essential nature cannot undergo change. It cannot become something else. Also, Ekarupa Swarupabhak. Jiva Goswami has said that the Atma always remains situated in its nature. So then that starts to raise a big question. If that is in fact the case, how do I find myself in a situation in which I'm identifying with one karmic temporal iteration after another? If the Atma in fact is Navikari, it does not change, and in fact is always situated in its own nature, how is this possible? So it's described that the Lord has unlimited Shaktis. Parasya Shakti Vidvidaiva Shruyate. There's unlimited Shaktis or potencies of God. One of those Shaktis or potencies is called Jiva Shakti. The Jiva Shakti runs the expanse of the entirety of Bhagavan's creation. Not only the material creation, but the eternality of the spiritual creation. So that Jiva Shakti is something that runs through the entire scope of Bhagavan's everything, right? One way to understand this is through Chatti Shloke in Srimad Bhagavatam. The very first verse of the Chatta Shloke, Ahameva Shameva Grinanyat Sat Asat Paramam Pascharaham Yareshtascha Yovashisheta Shoshmyaham. Krishna is telling to Brahma, before the creation existed, I existed. So here, Agri or creation means the material creation. So there was an eternal manifest reality that existed prior to this creation. And Krishna says, that is me. So that is me means not only Krishna Roop and Swarup, but everything related to Krishna Roop and Swarup. Means all Krishna's associates, all Krishna's energies, Krishna's Dham, everything. During the creation, Sat Asat, all of the cause and effects that are taking place here is also nothing but God. Nothing but Krishna, he's saying. There's not another reality going on. Everything is only Bhagavan. And after the temporal unmanifestation, that's the wrong way to phrase that. After the temporal manifestation is done, because it becomes manifest and unmanifest, then Krishna is saying, only I exist afterwards. So the first claim, before the creation I existed, and the last claim, Yogashishekta Shoshmyaham, only I exist after the creation, both refer to the spiritual reality. So that creation part is called Shrishti Lila. It is one pastime of Bhagavan in which he creates an atmosphere which is influenced by temporality, meaning that it's only temporary, and it does not facilitate full cognition, nor does it facilitate full bliss. So in that creation, the Jiva Shakti also has some existence there. So now that brings us to another point. Well, I'm Jiva Shakti, I understand. And as Jiva Shakti, my individual identity is called the Atma. Because every Atma, Jiva Goswami says also in Paramatma Sandarbha, is Pratiksetra, means their own individual manifestation. So I'm an individual manifestation of Jiva Shakti called an Atma, and I have found myself existing in the temporary creation of Bhagavan. So now I need to understand, first of all, how that could be possible, right? And secondly, what's my prospect for extricating myself from the temporal manifestation, because it does not, one, give expression to the eternality of my existence because it's manifest and unmanifest in a temporary cycle. Secondly, it doesn't afford me full cognition. For instance, I cannot understand fully who am I, nor who is Bhagavan, nor what is the eternal spiritual reality. Neither I can experience uninterrupted or even full manifestations of bliss or Ananda Shakti. Right? Because I can't experience any of that, those questions, or that essential question, who am I? And then the secondary question, why am I undergoing this temporal existence, those two questions become prominent. So, now the question becomes, is the Jiva Shakti wholesale part of this temporary creation? Or is there another status of this Jiva Shakti which doesn't undergo this temporal manifestation and all the things involved in it? So the answer is then Jiva Goswami, as well as all of our acharyas, describe two kinds of manifestation of the Jiva Shakti. One is those individual Atmas who are composed of Jiva Shakti who never experience the temporal karmic iterations of the material world. They are called Nitya Siddha. They are eternally perfected or accomplished. Secondly, there is another group which is called Anadi Bhada. Sometimes the word Nitya Bhada is used, but here Jiva Goswami has said this Nitya Bhada is actually Anadi Bhada. In Tattva Sandarbha, Jiva Goswami goes over what is the meaning of the word Anadi. Anadi means literally no beginning. So there is no traceable time under which you can assess when I came into this material environment and started a karmic cycle going from one birth to another. There is no way to trace that out. So it became, during the time of Srila Prabhupada, for the sake of translating the idea of anadi, a term was used, time immemorial. The inability to remember the time factor in relation to our origin, our existence in the material world, etc. So this was a really kind of a compromise to help us understand. Because literally the word anadi means anadi, no beginning. So Jiva Goswami has said that this word literally means no beginning, but it does have an end. So anadi in this context means something that has no beginning, but it does have an end. So this end is when the jiva is able to come into enough grown or matured consciousness to ask the very questions we started this class with, which is, Ke ami, who am I? When that question arises in the jiva, it is symptomatic that there is the sort of maturation of human consciousness. And that in that maturation of human consciousness, not to its fullest, but to some degree, that maturation, then this question arises. Prior to some maturation in human consciousness, that question never comes up. The totality of the influence of the material energy overcomes the Jiva Shakti, the Atma, who's composed of Jiva Shakti, overcomes them and completely subjugates them to the influence of the three modes of material nature, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. Right? So let me try to flesh that out a little more. When the Atma, who's composed of Jiva Shakti, it also is mentioned that those jivas, they are called Tatashta Swabhav. The word Tatashta here does not mean a locale or a particular place. It means a disposition that's present in the Atma. That disposition is that it can be influenced either by material energy or by spiritual energy. That's why it is called marginal or tatashta, right? So that element of the Jiva Shakti, which has been from time without any beginning, influenced by the material energy composed of the modes of nature, they are called Anadi Bhada Jivas. So now, the composition of the Anadi Bhada Jiva, under the influence of avidya, which I'll come to next, is that one, they are having a gross physical body, which is derived from the karmic flow or the karmic package that they carry from one temporal iteration to another. In other words, whatever I've done in the previous life, along with my aspirations, that produces a particular karmic package or portfolio. The housing for that particular karmic portfolio that goes from one temporary iteration to another is housed in a subtle body called the Antakaran. Antakaran means a subtle body which is composed of one function called the mental function, right, which is the mind, right, and the mind has its prominent influence by the mode of goodness. Why? Because the mind only accepts and rejects. And when it does accept or reject something, it is doing so under the influence of the intelligence. Now, the intelligence is under the mode of rajas or passion, right? So the mind is considered to be in the mode of goodness because once you've reconciled the acceptance or rejection of something, there's a sense of peace. You understand? There's a sense, okay, I've decided to do this. Consequences, whatever, but I've accepted to do this. That sense of having come to a conclusion and have accepted it, including its consequences, that actually is an activity of the mode of goodness. The deliberation to come to the point of acceptance or rejection is in the mode of passion. The intelligence gives several arguments why you should or shouldn't do something, and it continuously battles with itself. Well, no, because last time we did this, it was very good. Yes, but it was not good for us. Yes, but you can't always be on top of your game. Sometimes, so that kind of vitarka means like deliberation back and forth is in the mode of passion. And the acceptance of the dominating feature of tamogun means to simply act strictly under the influence of eating, sleeping, mating, defending, without any movement towards higher consciousness or any movement towards even sort of human consciousness. Because the human consciousness is differentiated from animal consciousness in the fact that it can do this kind of deliberation on itself. One of the 21 qualities mentioned by Jiva Goswami, Swashmai Swayam Prakash. The Atma has the ability to understand itself and itself in relation to other things. If in the human form of life we don't act on that principle, that's considered to be completely being dominated by the mode of tamogun or ignorance. Now, the Atma, under that influence of the three modes of material nature, only has the ability to desire. It doesn't have the ability to act out those things and or be the cause of whatever it is they desire to happen. Right? This is flushed out in one verse. Prakriti in Bhagavad Gita. Prakriti kirmanani gunai kamani savasha ahamkara vimudatma kartaham iti manyate. So in the verse it's saying, being bewildered, vimudatma, the atma, vimudatma, is bewildered into thinking, kartaham iti manyate. Into thinking it is the doer of activities that are in fact being carried out by the three modes of material nature. That's directly the verse. So how does this bewilderment of the Atma come about? That is what is called the Avidya Shakti of Bhagavan, which allows the Satchit Ananda, the essentially spiritual Atma, to be overcome by an influence of the material energy. That Shakti is called Avidya Shakti. So the word Avidya means the absence of knowledge. You understand? It is the absence of knowledge. What knowledge? Jiva Goswami wrote, Anari Paramatatva Jnanam Samsara Gabhava Maya. The absence of the Paratattva Jnana, the knowledge of my spiritual identity and relations. The absence of that knowledge allows the jiva to come under the influence of the avidya shakti. You understand? So, once the jiva comes under the influence of that avidya shakti, then there's a series of things that take place. One is asmita, because you cannot take away the existence of the Atma because it is Sat, it's eternal. A false sense of who is that Atma can be presented. That is called asmita. I am something, but it's not related to the actual transcendental reality of who I am. It's some kind of false identity. In order to bolster and to secure that false sense of being something other than the Das of Krishna and being the Atma, then the ahamkara, right? Like in the verse, ahamkara vimudatma, the ahamkara becomes the binding element to the avidya shakti and asmita to reinforce that I am something other than the Das of Krishna. How? By projecting ourselves in the same position as Krishna. How? Remember I quoted the verse from chapter Shloke. Aham evasham evagri. Aham appears in that verse I think 3 or 4 times. So aham is actually the designation of Bhagavan because he is truly the cause and the doer of everything via his various shaktis. But that is not the position of the jiva. Ahamkara vimudatma. So what does ahamkara mean? I. So that's the first influence of ignorance. That this is asmita in action. I am the karana and karta of everything. Karna means I'm the cause, karta means I'm the doer. So we just heard the verse of Bhagavad Gita declaring that that's illusory. That's wrong. But the egoism, in Sanskrit it's called abhiman, of being the cause and the doer is entrenched in the chitta, means the consciousness of the soul, of the atma, and we acting through that mechanism of ahamkara from one life to another. That I am the cause and I am the doer. According to the verse in Bhagavad Gita, we're neither. So what are we? We are a witness. We're simply from the position, Ekrup Sarupabhak, from that transcendent position, we're witnessing the great influence of the Avidya Shakti on us. And vicariously we're identifying with it. Because it is not our real identity, it gives rise to a sort of spiritual schizophrenia. What is that? Rag and dvesh. A duality arises. So that's just one verse. Bhayam dviti abhiniveshatasya. Due to absorption in the material energy, dvitiya, a duality arises. You understand? Or there's another verse. Icha dvesha samutvena dvandva mohena bharata. Being bewildered by a duality. Because I'm identifying with something that's not really me. So that it's almost like a person in the material world who's undergoing some psychological issue of bipolar or schizophrenia, where they have sort of multiple personalities. So we're identifying with the material energy and asmita, something I'm not, boasted by ahamkar, but now we need a specific identity, right? Because just not being who I am and having a sense of being something different, which is false, like ahamkara, is not enough. There needs to be specification because every atma, Jiva Goswami says, is pratik seitra. So each atma has to find individuality within this material influence. That material individuality is called upadi. Upadi means the particular family, culture, place, status, everything that you're born into is a particular manifestation of your karmic portfolio that gives you a direct identity. It's called upadi. Just like there's one verse that describes to come to pure devotion, Sav upadi vinir muktam. To give up all the upadis means the designations that you've acquired artificially, to give them up, this is the path to liberation. So, once we acquire these things, avidya is the shakti, asmita is the false sense of identification of the soul. That gives rise to rag and dvesh, a duality. And then from that comes abhinivesh. Abhinivesh means the strength of that absorption, which doesn't allow the atma to extricate itself on its own from that material influence and the influence of the 3 modes of material nature. So this is discussed in the 11th canto Srimad Bhagavatam. Anari avidya yuktasha purushasha veda atmanam. Swato na sambhavanti. On your own, you cannot extricate yourself from the absorption in the material energy and its influence. Swato na sambhavanti anya. It requires another person. So then the last line gives description of that person. Gyanatva ganado bhavet. Gyanatva means that person who's situated in transcendental reality, in spirituality, and has the compassionate disposition to infuse you with spiritual energy to extricate you from the material influence. So I began to talk by describing the importance of constantly reiterating the question in your own consciousness, who am I? And then having some sense of this kind of understanding, it allows a kind of affirmational disposition, if that's a good word. Means a constant reaffirming that looking at everything in clear view, this is not me. This upadi, garnered from karma, based in the subtle body and the ahamkara, this is not me. Who am I then? So the constant reiteration of that question brings up this chain of thought, especially if you are fortunate to be in the practice of bhakti. You understand? So then, as we're constantly reaffirming that I have the question, who am I, it begs the answer. You understand? Then, if we follow, right, what I just told in that verse in the 11th canto, Anya Gyanatva Gyanado Bhavet. We pursue someone who's situated in a position, just as Sanatana Goswami did with Sriman Mahaprabhu. We find someone who has Gyanatva. So Gyanatva here means not information, but realization of the spiritual reality, which is directly the same thing I have. I am also spirit by nature, but they have realization of that. And they are Gyanada, right? They have the disposition to reveal that knowledge. And I'm calling it reveal, not simply give, right? Because information is one thing, realization is another. So, Gyanatva Gyanadobhavet refers to Sadhu Guru. Through Sadhu and Guru, the transmission of revelation of the spiritual reality is infused in the heart of an aspirant. Once he comes to, or she comes to the point of the upsurge of the question, who am I? Then the Sadhu Guru taking compassion on that person. Because Gyanatva Gyanada. So the word da here means many things. One is the dati, to give. One means doya, mercy. You understand? So having that kind of disposition allows the sadhu or guru to give, just put it in sync, sweetie. It allows them the disposition to transmit that gyan. What kind of gyan? Sambandha gyan. To transmit sambandha gyan to that aspirant, thereby giving them the reality of their spiritual identity. You understand? The beginning of that realization comes when there's simply the realization that I am the Das of Krishna. Dasa bhuti hari eva nanyasheva kadachanan, and I cannot be this material experience. But rather I am the Das of Krishna. Now, I have to negotiate from that constitutional reality of my identity. That would be more like the state of amnesia. I realize I'm a human being, but I've forgotten everything. You understand? I'm speaking ontologically here, not historically. Because it's not like we were once Krishna conscious and we forgot it. That's not possible. So ontologically speaking, it is like amnesia. You understand? Even Jiva Goswami has used that example actually. He's called it, it's almost like lupta, like forgetting and then remembering. Right? But it's not a historical thing, it's an ontological statement. So now, having that understanding that I am the Das of Krishna, I can begin to operate with the currency of the first sort of deposit coming from a sadhu guru. The first deposit of spiritual energy is called Shraddha or faith. Ado Shraddha. Understand? Shraddha has a potency in it. You understand? Faith has a potency in it. Shraddha Anupayani Varajam Bhakti Unmukhi Chitta Vritti Vishesh. It has the power, having come from the heart of a sadhu guru, to turn the actions and functions of the chitta towards the spiritual reality. Something that you could not do on your own. Swato na sambhavanti. Something you could not accomplish according to Shastra on your own. The distribution of that spiritual energy called Shraddha coming from the heart of Sadhu Guru has that power. When the Atma accepts that sort of that distribution of the potency of faith coming from Sadhu Guru, they then develop the power to begin searching out the truth of who am I? You understand? The important thing in the sort of immature stage is not to let the question die. There has to be a constant questioning of who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Is this really me? Because if not, the nature of the material energy is so overwhelming, and the nature of the function of a ahamkar is so powerful that one can remain consumed and subsumed by the material energy, and you just can't get out. I was giving an example the other day on our phone conference class that when I was preaching in Africa, we once were at a beach, and the ladies, Matajis, were swimming in one area, and the male devotees were swimming in another area, and we suddenly heard some screaming and everything, and when we looked over, we saw that there was one younger girl devotee who was apparently drowning. So 2 devotees went to swim and help her, and of course they were able, by good fortune, to get a hold of her and to start to bring her back. So what had happened was, at that particular beach, you can walk for quite a distance and the water will only come up to at least your waist height. It'll begin, normally at your ankles, everything will come up. Then you can walk for quite a distance and the water will only be up to your waist. But at a certain place, a certain distance in the water, it's not a gradual grade. It's not a gradual gradation. It's a sudden drop. So apparently this young girl had walked, and then suddenly there was no bottom. You understand? It just dropped. So the material energy can be like that. The material energy can allow you to wade it up to your waist, and everything seems like you're still in control, because this is one of the features of a ahamkar. It gives a false sense of control. So you can think everything is under control, and then the next thing you know, you've stepped off that no bottom point. And suddenly you find yourself overwhelmed and consumed by the material energy. Then when you're able to finally resurface, it's like a what happened type moment. Then you have to try to regroup your spiritual practice and everything else. Understand? So we have to be very careful to always sort of take caution by the reaffirmation of who am I? Who am I? Who am I? And if I wanted to align it with the analogy that I just gave of the ocean, it would be, I want to take very measured steps, especially for those who have to have some dealing with the material world. Right? I always quote this verse, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu told the Raghunath Das Goswami, you don't have to do false renunciation. Don't do renunciation like monkeys. They appear to be very renounced, but we know the behavior of monkeys. You understand? But he said, Antaranishtakara bhayalok vyavyahara. Become firmly situated internally in the progressive march in bhakti, and bhayalok vyavyahara. Deal with the material world in an appropriate way. You understand? Appropriate means you should see the material world as an energy of Bhagavan. And anything that's come into your purview related to the material energy, you should see it through the prism of having been arranged by Bhagavan for helping me to make my progressive march towards the spirituality and Bhagavan's service, having realized I am the servant of Bhagavan. You understand? If we try to exploit what comes into our purview in the material energy, that's when that oceanic drop-off example comes into play. You understand? If not, the ability to wade in the water of the material energy in terms of a job, family, social dynamics, everything else is possible if you stay situated in your spiritual perspective. As soon as you allow the material energy to become, by the influence of false ego, again something, because if false ego, there's another aspect to it. Aham, I am the karna, cause, and doer, karta. The natural outcome of that is I am the bhokta or enjoyer. That's the natural outcome of the ahamkar's influence. I'm the cause, I'm the doer, and hence I'm naturally the enjoyer. When that influence comes, then we lose track of being the sevak of Bhagavan, and we immediately become servant to our senses and our subtle senses, and that's when that drop off into the ocean comes. Because then the ahamkar blinds us to the idea of the question, who am I, and reaffirms your asmita and the particular upadi you have in this life. So enjoy. You understand? So this question, to bring everything back home and summarize, this question of who am I is very, very important. I'm not going into details about realization of the individual spiritual identities. I've spoken about it before, but that's another sort of track. Because once you do come to the point of understanding that I am the Das of Krishna, and trying to situate yourself based on antaranishtakara, the firm faith and actions according to that faith, that I am the Das of Krishna, then your material dealings, your vyaviharic dealings, will align naturally with that reality that you've understood. You understand? And your actions will dictate that, and that's manifest in anukulyasya sankalpa, pratikulyasya vivajanam, lakshashiti, vishwas, guptavevaranam tata, etc. Right? These are the elements of saranagati, the portal or the entrance into bhakti. And it's the first anga of bhakti. Right? Because after do shraddha comes sadhu sangha. So when the influence of faith, as I described before, becomes particularly powerful, it leads to the sadhu. And coming in contact with the sadhu, one takes that faith and deposits it at the lotus feet of sadhu. Rupa Goswami has described this as Guru Pad Asray. Understand? The first anga of bhakti saranagati. Understand? So then this begins the sojourn to understanding our spiritual identity individually, etc., etc. So that's a whole other topic, so to speak. It's related, but it's another topic. But here we just want to emphasize the importance of understanding the necessity to continuously reaffirm the answer to the question, who am I? So Jivera Supoya Krishna Nitya Das was the answer that Sriman Mahaprabhu gave to Sanatana Goswami. And that constant affirmation, I am the Das of Krishna, is borne out in the day-to-day practice on the path. When you wake up in the morning, the first thing you do even before you put your feet on the ground is you make Anjali and you say, Nama Om, Na Aham Ameti. I'm not the Ahamkara, I'm not the Supadi, right? But I am the servant of my Guru Pada Padma. And my Guru Pada Padma, Sakshat Hirita, he's the agency or manifestation of Bhagavan in this world. Understand? So, hopefully this was somewhat helpful, because there was a whole collection of questions about Sambandha Gyan. But I think beginning from this point, trying to understand, first of all, the sort of ontological setting. What's the reality? What's going on here? Right? Because it's very hard, because the influence of material energy is such that it doesn't afford even the time to deliberate on these things in many cases. We're always confronted with material energy and its demands. The demand for taking care of family, the demand for doing this, the demand for that. And because the Ananda Vritti is part of the nature of the Atma, there's always the search for how will I become happy. And then when that becomes corrupted by false ego, it becomes how will I become happy to the exclusion of who I actually am, which then becomes problematic. Understand? So the ontological breakdown, what is the Shakti of Bhagavan called Jiva Shakti? What is the Atma, the individual manifestation of that Jiva Shakti? What is the composition of the Atma, Sat, Chit, and Ananda? Right? What is the material energy? Right? Earth, water, fire, and ether is the facilities of the gross body, but the subtle body is the actual vicarious connecting element to the Atma, which gives it the ability to be influenced by the material energy and the modes of nature. Understand? So having this clear conception about everything is the beginning of being able to operate in this arena and see clearly what is what. Because you got to think, for the majority of the population, billions of people, they cannot even distinguish what's what about the material energy. So they're fully caught up in their antakaran, means the subtle body, and the conceptions coming from the subtle body. The soul never touches the material energy. Asanga hiyanyam purusha never touches material energy, but the vicarious connection with it is very strong. Right? Because we talked about the meaning of the word abhinavesh, one of the 5 features of avidya. It consumes and subsumes the consciousness emanating from the Atma and gives the Atma the identification Asmita, and then by false ego, I am the doer, I am the cause, and I'm hence the enjoyer, and the particular upadi to do that with, from one karmic iteration to another. So hopefully this was a little helpful. Sometimes I've spoken to some devotees who said, Mukunda, but some of it sounds very technical. Well, part of the issue is that we have to, in our consciousness, begin to look through a different prism. And that means to start looking through a deeper philosophical pair of glasses. So even though it may sound technical, if you really, under guidance, hear these things again and again and again, and you put on the goggles, glasses, or whatever you want to call them, of looking, it's called vichar, of looking in such a way as to do vichar, means deep consideration of what's happening, it will give rise naturally to a deeper and deeper understanding. And that will foundation your internal practice. Because you can't begin to understand what is Sambandha Gyan, especially if you say Sambandha Gyan, what is the nature of my spiritual identity, what is Swarup Shakti and its influences. You can't begin to understand that unless you come to the position of being Das. Just like within the material arena, you can't begin to contemplate spirituality until you come to the human platform. Right? Because among the animal species, eating, sleeping, mating, and defending are the primary functions of their consciousness. But in the human form of life, consciousness can raise to the state of inquiry about spirituality. So in the same way, until you come to the position of understanding I'm the Das of Krishna, the Visesambandha Gyan of how you're the Das of Krishna will be difficult to contemplate. Understand? That's why a devotee can take Diksha, but still not understand that everything about his internal spiritual identity was given at the time of Diksha. Because there's no locus standi at this point in being even the Das of Krishna yet. Because there's still obfuscation coming from the false ego. Because we also have to remember one thing about false ego. False ego is really, really thick. Right? Remember the sort of in an ontological description it describes that each of the elements is 10 times thicker than the last. And a humkar is the last thing. So just imagine how influential a humkar is. That even when a person comes into the spiritual arena, it's not that they break a humkar, but rather the humkar simply says, you were John Doe, and you now become Bhakta John. But the humkar didn't leave because of that. The humkar will follow you into the spiritual arena and say, okay, now you're John Doe. So here's some new upadis for you. One, you're a Bhakta. Not only you're a Bhakta, but you're a very good Bhakta. And now you've been promoted to Temple Commander, Temple President, GBC. Now Guru Abhiman, you're Guru. So Ahamkar is so tricky. You understand? And you cannot divest from the Ahamkar until the real sense of identity is present. So the establishment of Dasata to Krishna, and then further, Visesambandha Gyan in relation to Krishna, who am I, when that becomes, or starts to even become situated in the chitta of the jiva, that's when they can divest from Ahamkar. All right, I will have to leave here to continue some other services, but my Dandavat Pranam to all the devotees who are here or who may hear this. Please give me your mercy and blessings to continue in the service of Hari, Guru, and Vaishnavas. Jai Vancha Kalpaturu Visha, Kripa Shindavevacha, Patitanam Pavanevyo, Vaishnavevyo Namo Namaha. Jai Radhe Radhe.